You are sitting quietly in your room, and for a brief moment, your life feels perfectly normal and relatively peaceful. But then, almost out of pure, unconscious habit, you reach into your pocket, unlock your glowing screen, and begin to scroll. Within just 10 short minutes, that profound sense of baseline peace completely vanishes into thin air. Suddenly, the entire world outside your window feels incredibly chaotic, deeply terrifying, and filled with massive, unseen threats. It vividly feels as though the massive ground is violently crumbling beneath your feet, even though you have not actually moved a single inch. This incredibly sudden, massive shift in our daily emotional baseline forces us to ask a very profound, deeply uncomfortable question. Why is it that the absolutely more time we spend scrolling through our digital feeds, the more intensely anxious and terrified we become? Does our prolonged, endless exposure to the digital world simply reveal the hidden, massive dangers we were previously ignoring? 8. Or is there something fundamentally, profoundly different happening within the highly intricate relationship between our digital screens and our ancient minds? To truly understand this paralyzing modern anxiety, we must first completely demystify exactly how these massive digital platforms actually operate. We often mistakenly view modern social media platforms as highly neutral digital town squares, where factual information simply flows freely and equally. However, the absolute undeniable reality is that these platforms are highly engineered, incredibly sophisticated digital environments specifically designed to harvest your attention. They were absolutely never built with the underlying fundamental intention of keeping your human mind calm, highly informed, or emotionally balanced. The entire massive multi-billion-dollar business model of the modern digital economy fundamentally relies on keeping your eyes glued to the screen forever. To successfully achieve this massive corporate goal, the underlying mathematical algorithms must actively prioritize content that instantly provokes a deep, powerful psychological reaction. A beautifully written, highly nuanced article about gradual, boring societal progress is incredibly easy for the human mind to simply scroll past. But a highly dramatic, deeply shocking video aggressively warning you of an imminent, terrifying economic collapse instantly commands your absolute, undivided focus. These massive tech platforms quickly learn that the absolute most effective, guaranteed way to drive massive engagement is to constantly trigger your survival instincts. When you are deeply afraid, highly outraged, or profoundly shocked by a viral narrative, you simply cannot look away from the glowing screen. You linger significantly longer on the dramatic post. You aggressively read through the highly heated comments, and you frantically share the terrifying warning with everyone. In the highly complex, totally invisible mathematics of the modern digital algorithm, your deep personal fear is immediately translated into highly profitable, massive engagement. The complex digital system does not actively hate you, nor does it intentionally want you to live a deeply miserable, highly anxious life. It is simply a completely cold, highly efficient learning machine that relentlessly optimizes for the exact emotional metrics that keep you completely, hopelessly hooked. Therefore, the digital world you vividly experience every single day is actively, continuously filtered to violently highlight the absolute most terrifying aspects of our reality. This highly unnatural, deeply distorted, algorithmic curation process leads directly to our absolute next major, deeply profound psychological vulnerability. Long before modern smartphones or the high-speed internet ever existed, the human brain already possessed a deeply ingrained, highly powerful flaw known as the negativity bias. We are biologically, deeply evolutionarily wired to be infinitely more sensitive to negative, highly threatening information than we ever are to positive, uplifting news. For our ancient nomadic ancestors, successfully remembering the exact, hidden location of a deadly predator was vastly more important than noticing a beautiful sunset. Ignoring a highly subtle, terrifying physical threat in the brutal wilderness almost always resulted in immediate, absolute, and violent death. Because of this brutal evolutionary history, our modern brains automatically treat every single piece of bad news as a top priority, life or death, immediate emergency. Social media platforms completely supercharge this ancient biological vulnerability on a completely unprecedented, absolutely massive, and entirely global scale. They actively take our natural, highly ingrained human instinct to constantly look for danger and aggressively feed it. A never-ending buffet of terrifying worst-case scenarios. A highly terrifying, deeply dramatic rumor about a newly emerging global crisis will naturally spread incredibly faster than a verified, highly boring factual correction ever could. Content that actively and loudly screams danger is heavily rewarded by the system, appearing infinitely more often in our daily, totally infinite algorithmic feeds. Your deeply anxious brain instantly latches onto these highly terrifying viral narratives, completely convinced that it is actively performing its evolutionary duty to keep you safe. It completely fails to truly realize that the massive, terrifying digital threats constantly presented on screen are often wildly exaggerated, highly edited, or entirely fictional. As you continuously consume this incredibly heavy, deeply dark digital information, your fundamental perception of actual physical reality slowly begins to deeply warp. You begin to genuinely, deeply believe that the entire physical world is significantly more dangerous, highly hostile, and incredibly unstable than it actually is. The constant, absolute daily bombardment of highly viral negativity completely drowns out the quiet, beautiful, and boring reality of everyday safety and human progress. You become entirely hopelessly trapped in a highly convincing, deeply terrifying mental state of absolute hypervigilance, constantly waiting for the next massive disaster to violently strike. This intense, deeply paralyzing daily fear is absolutely not a personal failure of your own internal logic or a massive lack of individual mental toughness. It is simply the highly predictable, completely tragic psychological result of an ancient survival mechanism violently colliding with highly advanced, highly manipulative modern technology. And this incredibly toxic, deeply historic collision is exactly how the complex algorithm eventually builds a highly customized, entirely false reality completely around you. It is incredibly crucial to deeply, fundamentally understand that what you currently see on your screen is absolutely not an objective, clear reflection of the real world. It is fundamentally just a highly personalized, deeply distorted digital mirror that only reflects your own previous clicks, deep watch times, and hidden, quiet anxieties. Every single time you briefly pause on a highly terrifying video about an impending economic crash, the algorithm silently takes a highly detailed, completely invisible note. Every single time you deeply read a heavily polarized, incredibly angry comment section, the system completely refines its massive, highly complex digital model of your mind. If you consistently interact with highly dramatic content about massive global conspiracies or deep societal collapse, this system will aggressively deliver more of exactly that. Before very long, your entire, totally infinite digital ecosystem is completely flooded with highly terrifying, apocalyptic warnings, coming from every possible, highly dramatic angle. This perfectly creates a deeply powerful, credibly convincing psychological illusion that absolutely everyone is currently talking about these terrifying, massive global threats. You completely, utterly forget that millions of other normal people are actively experiencing entirely different, completely customized, and highly positive digital realities on their own devices. You are absolutely not actively observing the vast, incredibly complex, and highly nuanced real world through a clear, totally transparent glass window. You're effectively looking strictly through a highly distorted, deeply algorithmic tunnel that has been specifically, mathematically built to perfectly validate your deepest, darkest fears. This massive, highly manipulated digital echo chamber makes the highly viral, deeply terrifying theories feel completely undeniable and absolutely scientifically true. The highly advanced algorithm successfully transforms a completely isolated, highly rare negative event into an inescapable, massive, and deeply terrifying daily reality. If you are constantly, relentlessly shown highly edited videos of massive global chaos, your deeply biased brain will naturally mathematically conclude that the entire world is ending. Completely lose all sight of the profound, incredibly boring truth that massive, sprawling portions of the world are actually entirely peaceful and quietly functioning. The massive digital system completely robs you of your crucial, deeply objective perspective, replacing it entirely with a highly synthesized, tightly controlled state of constant panic. You ultimately become a completely helpless, totally passive prisoner within a terrifying, highly invisible digital cage that your own unconscious actions actively help to build. This profound feeling of immense, inescapable dread is then heavily, violently compounded by the sheer, absolutely overwhelming volume of information we desperately consume every single day. This dangerous loop leads us directly to the massive, highly modern psychological crisis of extreme, deeply toxic information overexposure. Just a few short, highly analog decades ago, our daily access to highly negative, terrifying global news was strictly and naturally limited by physical time and local geography. You might calmly read a deeply concerning newspaper in the quiet morning, or actively watch a brief, highly structured television broadcast in the early evening. But today, we are all deeply, permanently connected to a massive, relentless, 24-hour global fire hose of highly intense, deeply terrifying digital information. We constantly receive immediate, highly terrifying push notifications about massive, violent tragedies occurring on the absolute opposite side of the entire physical planet. Our ancient, highly evolutionary brains were fundamentally strictly designed to process the relatively small, highly manageable threats entirely present within a local, tight-knit village. We are absolutely not biologically, psychologically, or emotionally equipped to correctly process the massive, deeply collective suffering of 8 billion people all at once. This completely unprecedented, deeply unnatural, and highly absolute level of constant high-stakes exposure violently overwhelms our incredibly fragile, deeply human nervous systems. We are continuously forced to violently, deeply empathize with massive, highly complex global crises that we have absolutely zero physical power to actually fix. This massive, unending, completely brutal barrage of highly threatening information keeps our internal stress hormones constantly elevated to deeply dangerous, highly toxic biological levels. You are actively living in a permanent, highly exhausting state of biological fight for flight, even while comfortably and safely sitting alone on your own living room couch. Your deeply overloaded brain is desperately trying to rapidly process an infinite, highly chaotic stream of massive global dangers, leading directly to profound, severe, chronic anxiety. The deep, fundamental, highly necessary sense of baseline safety that is absolutely required for a healthy human life is completely and utterly shattered into pieces. We constantly, deeply feel as though we are actively under intense attack, completely surrounded by highly invisible, incredibly complex global forces we cannot possibly understand. This massive, absolute, unending exposure to profound global trauma fundamentally changes our baseline reality, making extreme, highly toxic daily anxiety feel completely, totally normal. And this profound, completely tragic psychological overload ultimately leads to the absolute most deeply paralyzing consequence of our highly connected, deeply digital modern era. We mistakenly deeply believe that by constantly consuming this massive, highly toxic stream of terrifying information, we are actively preparing ourselves for the absolute worst. We desperately try to aggressively scroll our way into feeling a profound sense of deep safety and absolute, calming personal control over the massive global chaos. But the harsh, entirely undeniable reality is that endlessly consuming highly dramatic negative content absolutely does not provide any real, tangible, or physical power whatsoever. It only successfully creates a massive, deeply paralyzing psychological illusion of control, while actively and violently draining your highly valuable, completely finite mental energy. You become deeply, profoundly, and highly painfully aware of absolutely everything that is currently wrong with the world, but completely incapable of actively changing any of it. This massive, deeply agonizing gap between incredibly high global awareness and absolutely zero personal influence rapidly breeds a deep, heavy state of profound psychological helplessness. You eventually succumb completely to a massive, highly crushing wave of severe mental fatigue, completely exhausted by the endless, highly emotional, terrifying digital roller coaster. Your beautiful mind eventually becomes so completely, totally burned out that you can no longer accurately differentiate between a massive, genuine global threat and a minor daily inconvenience. The massive algorithm completely succeeds in keeping you constantly highly engaged, but it entirely, absolutely destroys your profound capacity for deep peace and highly rational thought. This deeply exhausting, highly toxic, completely endless cycle of algorithmic fear and complete psychological helplessness perfectly becomes the permanent, heavy background noise of your entire life. So, we must actively, bravely pause and ask ourselves, is the entire physical world truly becoming vastly, undeniably more dangerous with every single passing day? Or have we simply, tragically allowed a massive, highly optimized digital machine to deeply distort our vision, forcing our beautiful minds to only see the absolute darkest shadows? We absolutely must completely reclaim our own profound mental sovereignty right now, aggressively curating our digital information and fiercely protecting our incredibly precious daily attention. Social media absolutely did not create the dark, ancient human emotion of deep fear from scratch, but it undeniably powerfully acts as a massive, highly toxic magnifying glass. It aggressively takes the completely normal, highly manageable, and entirely natural anxieties of daily human life and violently projects them into terrifying, massive, world-ending monsters. Ultimately, the absolute most profoundly revolutionary, deeply powerful act you can ever perform today is to simply close the glowing screen. Step completely outside and remember what the quiet, real world actually feels like.